So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Joakim Palme. I'm professor of political science here at the Department of Government, Uppsala University. I also have a past as director of the Institute for Future Studies, and therefore I've been given this honor to guide the discussion about the future. And yes, Jan Torell, I know from my previous craft that it's difficult to make predictions, and especially about the future, and that we as social scientists should be aware of all the difficulties. Furthermore, that I would also add that one of the points of doing not predictions but future studies is exactly to stimulate a discussion and action so that unfavorable futures can be stopped and sort of speak to your moral point about choosing between the optimist and the pessimist sign. However, talking about the future is difficult, so I've reached out for help, and I've been very happy to attract such a distinguished panel. And I will very briefly introduce them, and because I think it makes much more sense to let them speak. I got the business card from the gentleman sitting in the middle. It says that he is an Ambassador Jan Eliasson, is chair of the governing board of CIPRI, but I also know him as former Deputy Secretary General of the UN, former Minister for Foreign Affairs, and in various positions in the Swedish government, but also a lot of experience from the ground in environments where democracy is not the biggest problem, but conflict and war. I'm also happy to have been able to persuade Keboitse Machananga, who is Director of Global Programs at International IDEA, which is the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance. It's a foundation based in Stockholm and has, for the past 2 decades or more than that, been working actively in engaging in supporting and sustaining democratization processes. And Keboitse has also experience from the ground and working in different capacities, both with USAID and with NGOs in education programs in Botswana. Third, Charlotte Petri-Gornitzka is currently chair of OECD CDAC, which is the organization that is struggling with the task of coordinating development aid from the richest countries in the world, involving also efforts to promote democratic development. She was previously Director General for CEDA and has a background also in the NGO sector as chair of both Swedish Save the Children and International Save the Children. And she's been awarded also Ilis Quorum, I reckon from her CV. They all three have a common interest in engaging with research, education. So I hope that we can really put pressure on them to respond to this whole day of very stimulating talks on the dark sides, on the brighter sides, and also the previous panel was about external actors. And I will try to make a prediction about what this panel will be about. We'll be starting about the dark side, moving on to the bright side. Then, what to do, classical Leninist question. And fourthly, the role of research. But I have also introduced an unpredictable element into this panel, and that it's going to be an interactive panel, so you are free to intervene and comment on each other. So, well, the dark sides, Jan, when I talked to you a couple of weeks ago, it was easy to provoke you to talk about the dark sides, and I thought you did that in a way that also speaks to the common theme of this conference, which is about human progress and ultimately about the goals that we have set for development in the SDG framework. But you were worried about democracy.
Well, I usually say that I'm still an optimist, but I'm a worried optimist. That's where I land generally. First of all, let me just say how happy I am to be here. I found myself to be back in my student and professor time, taking copious notes here during the sessions, and it's really great to be back here at Uppsala University. You forgot to mention, although I don't insist on a long CV, but I was visiting professor here twice with Peter Wallenberg at his great department, which is well known to all of you. And it's really, it's been a great day. And you've been very concise and very to the point. I should spread the word to diplomats and to politicians, how well you manage these sessions. I would say, after having listened to both the dark side session and the bright side session, that to me it looks pretty gray. From both sides. They almost landed in the same conclusions. So I would say, as the British officer after a long briefing, I am still confused, but on a higher level, as you've heard sometimes.
The longer the day.
That was a long introduction. to your question, I found that when I did the little list here during the coffee break of the dark side and the bright side, unfortunately, my dark side was much longer. And I really want to say that I am seriously concerned about the present state of affairs. I have, of course, a long-term optimistic scenario. We all have to have a long-term pessimistic scenario, but I think we are at a crucial point in history, I would say, today. In my whole life, have seen things improve, both personally for me in my life and for Sweden and for part of the world. I saw the wall break down. I see the progress that we pointed to earlier. But I must say right now, I think we are sitting on a fence. And I really seriously think that we will be asked by our children, you don't have children, many of you here, but your future children, what you did. 2017. Because I think there are really reasons for us to be very, very worried about the fertile soil for populism of its more nasty nature. I've seen this during my last 5 years as Deputy Secretary General, so many of these negative trends strengthened. I have seen during these past 5 years a growing, what we called in an internal discussion at the UN in December, a growing trust deficit. People are not trusting their leaders, are losing trust in institutions, and looking over their shoulders in great suspicions. Another such catchword is, of course, the growing fear factor. We're getting more and more scared. We are getting more and more worried about what will happen to us, both physically and what happens to our country and our future, our existential, our life here on the planet. But terrorism and those who are standing up for this nasty form of populism that we have seen on both sides of the Atlantic, their interests unite. Because what the terrorists want to do is to scare us and to divide us, and to make the democratic society fail. And every reduction of the beauty of democracy is going to be noted all the time. So we have to be careful with this huge provocation going on to scare us. We have to be vigilant and cautious, yes, but we must not be scared. We must be proud and strong and standing up for democracy and standing up for those rather dangerous forces which are around right now. And the sad thing, the reason why I'm landing on this pretty dark interpretation of the present state of affairs is that it seems to pay off in democratic societies. to sell the message of polarization, of division, of dividing into us and them. And even worse, doing it along rather primitive, basic lines like ethnic divisions, ethnic belonging, or religious belonging. And that, as I know as a mediator, makes it so much more difficult to find solutions when that emotional element of ethnic or religious beliefs come in. And therefore, I think it's absolutely crucial now that we really take the situation seriously, mobilize all good forces. We will, of course, in the end prevail, but we got to work very hard. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you, Keboitse. Can you add to the list of the dark sides?
Yes, thank you very much, and also let me join those who also appreciated being invited. I think it's for us at International IDEA, we appreciate it also because we, as a democracy support organization or democracy building organization, which is the only thing that we do as an intergovernmental organization, we think that it's always important that we are also part of conversations such as this because it does help us when we meet with researchers and are able to also tap into the latest, thinking and to be able to be sort of the people who are also able to bring it to the ground as we advise different actors on the ground who are very much engaged with reform processes. I'm also an optimist and beginning to be a cautious also optimist. I think that yes, democracy is challenged, and I was happy to hear that it is not only happening in this generation. There have been cycles of where we have seen in history where democracy has also been challenged. For me, I would rather choose that we look at it as an opportunity for democracy to strengthen even more, for institutions to reinvent themselves and to strengthen, and rather than look at it as the world of democracy is falling. What is it that we are seeing as a challenge? Why are we having the challenges that we are having in democracy? Why are we having, for example, the rise of populism? What is it that has given populism a ledge, those opportunities? Where does populism get them? It gets them essentially from some of the issues that we have been talking about. If democracy is not delivering on development or service delivery, then you will find situations where populists will also come in and take advantage. So I was happy when earlier in one of the presentations, the discussion about that research is now increasingly coming up to show that electoral democracy, for example, in the long term does bring about positive aspects when it comes to delivery. Because at the end of the day, and this is actually one of those things that I would like to put on the table for one of the researchers here to pick up as a research issue, to say, often we talk about democracy and then we talk about outcomes. With the people that we work with on the ground, they don't see these as two things. No. They see democracy, delivery as very much a core and a part of the definition and the conception of democracy. But I know that often in research, people will talk about democracy, but then they will also talk about the outcomes of democracy. The ordinary citizen on the ground doesn't see these two as separate things. They see the conception of democracy as delivery or economic benefits, a better life for themselves, as being very much a part of what democracy is and should be about. So in terms of essentially the issues of the dark side, I really do think that the research is showing consistently what we are also as practitioners on the ground, what we are seeing as the challenges and the problems. For example, the issue of the timing of elections during a transition is a very key one. Often, and I was happy that the last session talked about the role of the international community, because sometimes there's this push to just have elections when actually on the ground is not yet conducive for an election to happen. Then you do actually more damage than if you had waited and if you had actually included. Issues of cyberbullying are issues that we see all the time, particularly to minority groups and even to women, especially. They become the target of these issues. But also for me, some of the key issues that I would like to put on the table, especially on the dark side, is, as earlier somebody talked about, the need for a strong party system. And my key question would be, should we be talking about a party system, a strong party system, in this day and age when we are seeing so much disconnect between, at least for us who are working on the ground, we are seeing a lot of disconnect between the established parties, maybe not so in Sweden, but in many parts of the world. People are choosing to engage and to participate in other platforms other than be members of political parties, other than be members of any formal democratic institutions and processes. So how do we, maybe researchers can here help us to say, how do we bring this, because as an international idea, it's a key question that we are grappling with. How do we reconnect citizens with these institutions that are supposed to be useful for channeling the policy making process? And also on the dark side is the issue, at least a key question of how do we also make sure that citizens really do become citizens? How do we go back to that time when citizens in the democratization process, they're not just seen as voters? Because at the moment, what we are seeing and this is actually one of those key issues that really opens up the gap for populism to take root, is when citizens are just seen as voters. When we were, Stefan was presenting earlier, even talking about buying of votes. For me, that is telling. If as a politician, you would rather than deliver, rather than make sure that you are connected in many legitimate ways to your constituencies, you would rather buy votes. It shows that increasingly we are having this situation, which is actually a dark side. Citizens are no longer citizens, they are just seen as voting machines. So how do we deal with that? I think I will stop there for now.
Yeah, I think you were very helpful in adding dark sides here, dark issues. Charlotte, do you see any reason to introduce more issues here
on the dark side?
I don't think necessarily we need that. We have things to grapple with. I'd like to give, first of all, I'm an optimist by choice, not by facts. And I would say it's actually rather scary to be an optimist, because you're quite challenged. Because how can you be an optimist with all the knowledge we have? Well, by choice and by engagement. So I hope we will come back to that. But I'd like to say it was easier 10:30 today than 4 o'clock, because complexity was added, and that's what we are grappling with. I'm going to talk from a perspective of the development assistance or the development cooperation community, because there's so many angles we can have, but I'm going to narrow it to what I'm here to do, so to say. I represent 30 members or 30 governments. They came together to share knowledge, decide on their rules, and make better policies for development assistance some 50 years ago. I'm the first woman to be the chair. It took 50 years. We're talking about development issues. But I'd like to add to one of the things that I really think is a worry, and that is the theme on populism and creating expectations. And perhaps I'd also like to add some complexity on social media, because I think that what we need to put kind of in parallel to social media is speed and short-termism and what that makes to people. The data that I can share with you adds to this kind of the consequences, perhaps, of populism. Because the 30 members of the DAC, they have embarked on a road of development where the guiding principle is that development aid money or assistance is supposed to be targeting the least developed countries and people furthest away from empowerment. The 30 countries did decide 2 years ago on the global goals. And of course they were powerful in making that happen. They also decided to bring about some $3.5 trillion annually for development. So they really took decisions to commit to creating a better world. But at the same time, my figures show that the development assistance is more and more going to immediate needs rather than long-term development. It's less targeting the least developed countries, and a bigger proportion is actually in Europe for immigrants, for asylum seekers. And of course we need to be able to have several thoughts at the same time. Of course it's a good thing to open up Sweden, for instance. It's a very good thing. But is it development assistance as it was supposed to be, or is it something that Sweden, would be able to afford anyway? Because what happens on an international level is when this community who say we're going to deliver the new promises, in fact, is keeping more money to self-interest. That creates distrust because most migrants and immigrants are in Uganda, Kenya, other countries that are supposed to get the development aid. But they get less while more money stays in our part of the world. So it adds to the kind of trust issue between parts of the world that we are discussing. And why is this happening? I think it is because of the expectations some of these governments have at home. And the populism, if you will. Let me give you one example, and then I will end this first. UK is a very big donor. Some years ago, they decided to do, like Sweden almost, to give 0.7 of their BNI annually to development aid. They did something that nobody else have done. They put that in legislation. It's binding by law that they should do that every year. That means a lot of scrutiny. It's also in a point of time where perhaps the British people said, well, what about my hospital? What about, the things that is in my backyard? So it was not necessarily an easy decision to take. So today, when this is being challenged a lot, they are trying to change the rules that I'm in charge of, together with them, to open up for more possibilities to use the aid for different kinds of aid that was not on the agenda. More domestic needs, more anti-terrorism in the UK, more to security. When Irma hits, which is a real catastrophe, but it happens to be UK Virgin Islands, then they want to use money to that part of the world, despite the fact that they agreed some years ago that it's not a part of the world that should have aid. I'm not saying that they are wrong. I'm just trying to give you an example of how domestic policy, when it's pressured by promises like this and in a populistic debate, starts to shake. And one member of this community, UK, is a very strong voice in that community.
Thank you for not only pointing to problems and dark sides, but also for pointing to the fact that it can get worse, that some of these processes might be self-reinforcing. And I think now I'm feeling more and more comfortable, or it's a sort of déjà vu experience from my time at the Future Studies. There came a book by a Swedish journalist, Anders Bolling, about what I think he labeled the coziness of sitting in the shadow of the apocalypse. So, I mean, the darker our descriptions get, the more at ease we feel, and we can just sit back and say, well, it's bad, it's getting worse. it's nothing I can do. So I can relax. But with the way that we have organized this panel, we have to move on to the brighter side also. And perhaps I could encourage you to speak not only to what is good, but also about the virtue circles that we can trigger or have an idea about at least sustaining the virtue circles. Can you come up with anything bright after this dark start, Jan?
Who starts?
You start.
It's a somewhat shorter list. Well, I was very encouraged this morning by seeing the statistics on the fact that non-violence pays off. That was really great to see the statistics. And if you add to that the points that Peter Wallenberg made about finding peace agreements rather than aiming for military victory, and by that preparing the ground for democratic society to thrive, I think was really a bright spot for me today that I took note of. I also don't know whether another factor is a positive or a negative, and it has been so well described by you here today, and that is the new information communication digital revolution, which I call it revolution. It's absolutely, historically, one of the most important developments we've had, and I don't think we yet have come to grips with it. But one thing that has happened, which is of course good, is this depth of knowledge among everybody. When I was mediating in the conflicts in the Middle East and Africa in the 80s and 90s, with your father, I could see that people didn't know what was going on outside their own countries. Now you have these little things here, 6.8 billion of them, and you push a button and you know exactly what the situation is like in Europe or in a city where your cousins are living. And this creates what Jan Theorell spoke about, this situation of rising expectations. And this is, I think, crucial. I have coined a phrase that I hope I can sell to you as my phrase. We live in a day and age of instant gratification. People want to see results now. You throw out Mubarak, in comes Morsi. After 10 months, people in Egypt say, having these little gadgets. Is our life better economically, socially now? No. How often do we hear opposition movements in any place of the world, even democracies, say, we have to wait for the elections in 3 or 4 years' time? We should, we must, we maintain that, but I'll tell you, I hear it very rarely. And therefore, I think we need to take this into account, that we have this speed, increase of speed and expectations. And the democratic institutions have to adapt and meet this. But we have a huge problem because politicians, and I played that role also for a while, have difficulties delivering.
Yes.
Because many of the decisions are taken by other forces, in the private sector, in the globalization jungle, in different ways, and you cannot deliver what people expect. So they get more and more angry and disappointed that they don't get what they want, and then they say this democratic system doesn't work, and then they go back to now get back to the dark side again. So
we're losing track.
But in order
time
to
interrupt.
No, but I just wanted to leave you. I gave several lectures when I was in New York and US, but also here since I came back, and I said to myself, come on, you can't sort of be so negative and pessimistic. Come on, you've got to shape up. So I'll tell you my hope factors, very briefly. First of all, women. And I don't ingratiate myself with half of you here. It's really the most important historic development is underway. I'll tell you, if you feel, the women here perhaps particularly, that forces are against you, it's because it's getting serious. I travel all over the world, Africa, Asia, Latin America, Europe, of course. It's coming. Sweden is ahead, but that is going to be one of the most liberating, most important factors of world politics. Resolution 3025 will be a reality, and you will see things going very right. You're going to have a tough time, but it's going to be very important. And as I learned from a very close Prime Minister whom I served, again, related to Joakim, he said once when a person came in with a draft of a speech about the emancipation of women, he said, "Oh, come on, you haven't understood what this is all about." "Why?" said the speechwriter. Change the title immediately, not from emancipation of women to the importance of emancipation of man. It's for men and women. Number one. Number two, young people. We should move from the concept of working, as Charlotte and I discussed here in the audience earlier, from working only for young people. We have a lot to do for young people. Particularly, we should have done much better on education, also in my own country, I think. We should now change concept into working with young people. We are in a hurry. Why should we wait for them to be PhD or get into the directorship in the foreign ministry or whatever? They are here now. I've learned so much more from both my grandchildren and children, and see the enormous impatience and talent. We see this of the young researchers here. My God, I'm so impressed. We got to work with young people. Number two, hope. The third is knowledge, science, technology. We have this fantastic tool in our hands. Please learn the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the Agenda 2030. It's a tool not only for development, Charlotte, you and I talked about it. It's a tool for peace and security, and it's a tool for human rights and democracy. Look at that. That's a huge, great tool we have in our hands. And then last point, of course, hope, is international cooperation. We have dark forces that really now look inward and consider their own nation number one, and others lagging far behind that number one role, and think that they seem to live in the notion that in today's world you can run everything on the basis of win-lose, whether it is conflicts or trade or whatever. When, in fact, in today's world, there is no win-lose proposition. Maybe in the short run, but in the long run, it's either win-win, you find a way of weighing interest. If you don't do win-win, I'll tell you what happens. It's going to be lose-lose. So these are my hopes. Women, young people, knowledge, and international cooperation. And I would hope also for the future, diplomacy. There is a huge diplomacy deficit, a huge dialogue deficit today. Russia, US, North Korea, US. Oh my God, Sweden, Russia. Why don't we talk? That's what we were created for, to communicate, use our word, most important tool.
Because we write tweets.
Yeah, we don't. Yeah. So, over to you.
Yeah, Keboitse.
I thought this would be briefer, but
yeah. Sorry. And you also sort of ruined my prediction here in the sense that you're introducing both. I mean, what we should do, how we should intervene, and how we should use science. So, I think I will go with that and invite you to spin not only on the bright side, but also maybe how we can intervene better.
Yeah, right.
Keboitse, where is your?
Yeah, maybe before I go into how we can intervene, just to I had two main takeaways from this morning, particularly on the bright side, was also the link between local democracy and growth, and I think that perhaps even for some of us who've been very much engaged in democracy support, we have tended to focus a lot on the national level. And I think a lot of research also tends to focus on democracy at the national level rather than at the local level. And I think more and more this is actually an area where we need to really pay attention. Because if this is where a citizen can be able to see the difference in terms of what democracy can bring, perhaps this is actually the area where we should really invest more. And I'm thinking here even of the Sustainable Development Goals. If people at the community level, at the local level, are able to engage and to make these sustainable goals their own and be able to really see the difference that this makes, it will actually assist to build resilience in democracy. So this was a key takeaway for me. Another one was more both the role of electoral democracy when it is strong in delivery, but also the role of oversight, which actually gives hope that in this era of social movements, of citizens really disconnected, but we are still seeing also the role of institutions, that the institutions are still relevant. So we need to still focus on, as much as we need to really say, how do we bring the citizen, but we need to also say, how can these institutions become stronger and really play their role the way they are supposed to play their role. So for me, those are the two takeaways from this morning. But I also want to go back on the issue of the youth, because I think actually for some regions where you find that young people form the majority of populations, the region where I come from, Africa, the youth make more than 50% of the population. They are the majority. But then when they are excluded out of, they are the most excluded out of political processes, out of the economy, you know, it's actually a time bomb that is sitting to explode. Just last week there was a launch of, UNDP was launching a report on journeys to extremism. I don't know how many of you have seen that report, which is essentially about, they have done a study about how do young people in Africa, and they have chosen countries where young people are joining these extremist groups like Al-Shabaab and others. How do they decide, you know, what triggers them to decide that they are going to join this, these groups? And one of the startling statistics there is about, you know, when the majority of the young people out of that sample do not believe that their government can respond, can be able to deal with their challenges. They can't give them employment, they can't provide for them. When they really lose trust, it's about actually the issue of trust. So I think for me the hope is really the young people. Recently Nigeria, a few months ago, made a decision to lower the age group of people who can stand for political office as presidents, as governors, as senators, so that the young people are not just voters, but they can also be voted for and stand for political office. Because in a lot of countries, especially in the region where I come from, Africa, young people are voters and they mobilize for politicians, but often the age within which they can stand for political office, it's much higher, so they are not able to actually put themselves forward as leaders. My view is that young people, youth are leaders of today, not of tomorrow. So they are the hope. If we can engage them, even in some of these challenges that we are talking about today, let's go to them to ask for solutions. Because maybe for some of us who are already no longer falling within the category of youth, maybe we don't see things the way they see them. So why not go to them and ask for solutions? So for me, that is actually one of the bright spots that I see, as long as we can re-engage and engage the youth. What I also see as a bright, something that we, in my view, we should, rather than fear the rise of the citizen, I think we should actually embrace it. I know that some people don't view this protest movements as positive. In a lot of cases, I always say, let's look at the content. What are they asking for? Of course, there are certain protest movements where people are asking for things that are undemocratic. But I think when you look at those, there are few compared to those who are actually asking for respect of human rights, others which are anti-corruption movements. Let's embrace that, because basically, in my view, citizens are not saying we don't want democracy. They are saying we want deeper and broader democracy that really delivers on development. So for me, that is actually something bright and positive that we should really embrace, to say, okay, if this is the majority of these movements are actually asking for things which democracy is supposed to be about, should we not actually be embracing them rather than looking at them in a negative light? So for me, those are sort of the bright spots where I think if democracy, we go back to the basics of saying democracy is the rule by the people and for the people. And now the people are saying, you know, the few that are ruling, we don't think that they are doing a good job, and we are going to remind them why they are there. Why should we have this fear about protest movements? So for me, I think we need to focus more on the content of what they are protesting about rather than on just having this negative view and fear about the citizen, because I think they are actually the hope of actually having a better and deeper democracy.
And I can build on that actually, because taking away from this morning, not the whole day, the positives, one of the things that I found positive is when you can kind of say, well, I think then development is perhaps on the right, on the right route. And one of the right routes is support to civil society. Civil society space is shrinking, but development actors are more and more working with civil society. And what we heard today, I think, gives me new facts and energy to cajole with the members. So I really take away that. Another thing is the figures on democracy has led to, the basic needs. I mean, food, health, education. That has been debated, actually, before. But I think this morning we had more long-term facts, which then, again, for us, kind of say, well, okay, so if we continue as the donor community actually does, it spends 10% of total ODA every year on supporting democracy and civil society human rights. And if it does that in a context, then we might be on the right way doing so, thanks to this knowledge. Local democracy build growth. Well, if we understand what it means to be supportive on the ground, I do think today we also did talk about building institutions, working locally, as we often do, that it's not one size fits all. It's not the best solution, it's the solution that fits where we are, and we need to know the context more. But we didn't question the fact that we need strong institutions, and I think, again, it gives rigor to some of the things that I do daily. Well, that's a little bit hope in that then. And obviously, gender is, you are talking a lot about youth. I will just say, couldn't agree more. But I also want to stress the fact that we need to continue to work with the gender in a context and not as an issue on the side. Because we know from other research that money then seems to be targeting good things, education and other things. So it's not just for my self-empowerment, it's also what I do, how I invest in society. Hope for the future. I think that the global goals, if we take them seriously, if we dare to do that, is very hopeful as a compass. It's a kind of an agenda which is about an equal world within planetary boundaries. It's all in there, which makes it difficult, but why should we have another compass than that one? And the news, I think, that we should not underestimate is that this is not a development aid agenda. This is not about my 30 members giving aid. This is a universal agenda. Sweden has to improve, everybody, and it changes perhaps the power in which we work together, perhaps, if we're clever about it. It's not about transferring money. I give you some figures on money because that's a lot of what we do today. But this agenda has to be governance management in a different way than the way we know it. So one of my important tasks and my job is to understand together with my colleagues, how do we crowd in other actors and be on the backbench ourselves. Don't underestimate how difficult that is. There's a whole industry out there working with development aid, with a lot of people with salaries that might have to do things differently, that might even be redundant. Don't underestimate that resistance to change. I will come back to that when it comes to research. And then finally, I think the piece today on finance was very important. I perhaps think that business and finance was a little bit too little on the agenda today when we talk about the whole subject of democracy. But I actually see some hope, and it goes to these global goals again, because the pension funds were mentioned here earlier today. Swedish pension funds, yes, they do have a mandate, which is limited to climate and environment. But they take initiatives, and they are actually taking some leadership internationally on doing more than that, because they are inspired by this SDG agenda. So they are trying. AP1 is trying to focus on gender, for instance, and APX and Y and Z, and the private pension funds are also. They have actually gathered a group in Sweden around this, how to make sure that that their balancing act of a lot of pension money, obviously to us here because we're not young, but really for good. A little bit the choice we have we can all do to engage, and I think you will see that finance and business, they are of course interested in this agenda because they see self-interest in the long run. But it might not be, it might not be bad, but we have to be very conscious on how we work together.
Right.
Thank you very much, Charlotte, for bringing in the pension issue, which is my favorite research subject. So I would love to spend a few days on that issue. But someone said that timing is everything. Time is running against us. I would like to point to the fact that we're celebrating the centennial of the Knut and Alice Wallenberg Foundation. That this is a very good opportunity to discuss things in a longer perspective, not only the future, but also to reflect on the kinds of initiatives that politicians and researchers took at the time. And I have some favorites. There was a German politician and researcher who sort of started to distrust politics, and so he started to edit a 7-volume book, Die Welt in Zahlen, the world in figures. And his idea was that if we just get the numbers right about the situation in the world, then things will sort of solve itself. And in a way, I'm a great fan and always a lover of Videm, and this morning I got the same feeling that now, now we're getting the numbers right about democracy, so this is a very good start. But I need your sort of 1-minute version about this link between research and I mean, good policy making. And when I've talked to you before, no one saw the problem because you were so research and education oriented. But what's the what's the good sign, or can you see any dark sides or any problems in this sort of bridge between research and policy making?
Just start, Charlotte.
Oh dear. Thank you. No, first of all, I see only good things with science. I mean, it's because we have to chew what we have to chew, if you see what I mean. So I think it's really. But what I do think is, you did a great job today because you could communicate your research. That's needed because we're not using the science enough cross borders. So the bridge between knowledge and dissemination of knowledge is important to invest in. Challenge my community, because we are asking for data, but we spend nothing almost of development aid in data in country. We're not supporting that. So challenge us. Thirdly, we need data on the multilateral system. It's being questioned today by some that it doesn't work. And I do think that there are so much policy being
formulated.
Thank you. Within the UN, but OECD, for instance, World Economic Forum is an NGO, but hang on there. I mean, it's not an NGO, it's really a powerhouse. Look into this other international organizations and see what they do and how they live their values. I think that's important. Please do that.
Thank you very much. Keboitse, your 1-minute version, please.
Yes, okay. Yeah, well, science and research are always, at least for international idea, this is what we thrive in, because we even define ourselves as the bridge between, the academia, the research, and the practitioner. We are sort of the bridge in between. Currently, just to give an example, we are working very closely with the varieties of democracy. There's another set of indices that will be coming, which is called the Global State of Democracy set of indices, where really the varieties of democracy institute helped us to design that, because we want to look at the state of democracy globally every 2 years. So it's a very good example of that. But what we also want to do with that is to, once that analysis has been done, how do we make it relevant to the person who needs to make a decision about either a bill on the ground or a policy that they need to make? So that is why the report that you will see in mid-November, it will also have what we call practical, recommendations that people can use. My appeal to researchers here, I know that many of you are academics, but at the end of the day, as International IDEA, we are interested in supporting evidence-based policy-making processes on the ground. So at the end of the day, it's also about packaging all this rich knowledge. How do we repackage it? Work with you, with researchers here, to repackage knowledge and information in a way that at the end of the day, it can be useful to a parliamentarian, to a political party person who needs to make a decision, on their toes. I think at the end of the day, that connection needs to be made. Rich analysis on one side, but how do we make it accessible in terms of making it readable to a person on the ground who needs to make a decision about those. So we always need comparative data. We are asked all the time. Just in the last 2 months, we have had 3 countries asking us about who are dealing with, who are coming up with party financing laws. As International IDEA, we want to be in a position to be able to say, this is how they did it in such and such a country, in such and such a country. And this is where we would be able to, we would like to be able to connect with the research community to be able to get that kind of knowledge and package it for the person on the ground.
Yeah, we're now on, you reversed the speaker order, but so we're now on a negative time. So your 30-second bullet point.
I'm the last speaker. I planned it accordingly.
I will.
Shifting powers.
No, seriously. Well, I think what I've heard today was very inspiring, because I made notes, and at every page I wrote something in the margin what I can continue to work on. You have given me arguments for non-violence solutions. You give me arguments for negotiation rather than military victory through your research. I think you should be more forthcoming, more not assertive in pointing to how your research can be used. You must be horribly frustrated to see how things fall apart in the world, and you have tools in your hand. So I think we need to have these type of meetings with practitioners and with the researchers coming together and take away these false borderlines. I think one of my conclusions after 50 years of public service, both in the government of Sweden and for the UN, is that we have to put the problems in the center, the challenges in the center, and then ask who can do something about it. In other words, we should move away from the silos, and we should go into working horizontally. And by that, I don't mean go to sleep, but that we, for instance, these goals, I mean, they can never be achieved. I told the member states when we were in the end of negotiation, my God, you have put the most ambitious goals in front of us ever in history. You can't make it unless you mobilize the private sector, civil society, and so forth. And here's my challenge to you. Look at these 17 goals. Look even at the many targets and ask yourself, what can we do from the scientific academic community to make these realities? I was proud to be part of this process, of these goals, but I was very proud of the November last year before I left. The New York Academy of Sciences brought together people representing the scientific community and how they could help implement the Sustainable Development Goals. And it was a wake-up call for at least those who were there at that conference. So I think we should try to build those bridges. We need bridgeheads on both sides to have a strong bridge. My absolute last comment is to don't forget the refugees and migrants. We haven't talked about that at all. This is 244 million people who live in the world where they were not born, often without any rights. Migrant workers in the Gulf area, I've seen it, I worked with that. I worked with the refugee conference last year. We have 65 million refugees. We have the effects here in Europe with the migrants. We have people living here. We have to look at that. Because if we don't handle that problem, we will have a grave problem for democracy, I think.
For those who want to hear more from Jan, I should recommend you to come to the Martin Holmdahl lecture here at the university tomorrow. So there'll be another chance. I think we should.
I don't have the same time pressures as I have tomorrow. Thanks to Peter.
So we should thank the panel with a warm applause. And the last
I just want to say one thing. Congratulations. Congratulations. I have never been to a conference where we have had perfect gender equality at every panel. 2-2, 50-50 the whole, after all these three panels. Spread the word.
That's good. That's very good.
Thanks to you, Kerstin.
Jan will not get the last word. The last word will go to Kerstin Sahlin.
Thank you. Dear director of Knut and Alice Wallenberg Foundation, dear standing secretary of the Royal Academy of Sciences, dear Rector Magnifica of Uppsala University, dear speakers, dear colleagues, dear guests, it's been a marvelous day. I think it's been very exciting. Of course, we leave this room with sort of the pleasure of learning, of receiving all this knowledge, but also the awareness of all the problems that we have in the world. Just a very few reflections, personal reflections, as concluding remarks. The Knut and Alice Wallenberg Foundation film really emphasized the importance of supporting and of conducting research and science as a way to dig deeper into the unknown, of curiosity-driven, independent, excellent, long-term, and sometimes risky research, in the sense that we not always reach the results that we aim for. And I am very happy that we have been able to discuss research in this way today, and we have also been able to demonstrate that kind of research in the social sciences, where we have this curiosity-driven digging deeper into what is democracy, what is democratization, what are the sources, consequences, the changing nature, etc., etc. It's very interesting, and when we planned this day, we wanted to have both a demonstration of the sort of the curiosity, independent research in social sciences, but also to create a dialogue around this research. And I've certainly learned a lot from all of you. I think we have listened to social science when it's at its best. A red thread going through social sciences, and we have really heard about it today, is comparative. We compare, we learn through comparisons over time, over cases, over countries in this case, and across actors. I think we have seen also the extreme development and transformation, almost revolution of the social sciences with the mix of methods, with the use of big data sets, combined with digging deeper into individual cases and qualitative studies. I think we have seen also social sciences at its best because it's global. I have seldom been at a conference where the whole world is mentioned all the time. And many other parts of the social sciences have lots to learn from this. We have also heard social sciences at its best because it's reflective. It's never very sure. It's not the final truth. But we are testing our results and our presumptions all the time. Of course, we have also seen that new research issues are formulated and searched for as results from previous research because we have new data, because we have new theories. Old theories seem to be obsolete, but also because the world is changing. Personally, of course, being not in this, entirely in this field, but partly, I would have liked to see and will like to see in the future more on the transnational aspects. It was mentioned here. The world society, the multilateral, whichever term you would like. As a scholar in the business field or in the economic sciences, I hope that we will see more about the economic, financial side, the business side, and how that explains the variations and becomes also consequences from varieties of democracy. And these are only two things where I think that it would be nice to work more across disciplines and across methods. We have listened to fundamental research, but we also wanted to demonstrate and for ourselves and for others that there is no clear distinction. It's not that so independent science needs to be far away from the policy, but especially we as social scientists are really having open doors with the policy, learning from the policy, teaching or dialoguing with the policy side. And I think you gave us excellent examples of how policy and research can interact and do so much together. These are some of the lessons I would bring from here. I would, of course, thank you all, the speakers, the audience, the organizers sitting along the wall, Ylva and Anna-Liv, and the organizing committee, Uppsala University, and of course, most of all, the Royal Swedish Academy and the Knut and Alice Wallenberg Foundation, and the Knut and Alice Wallenberg Foundation, not only for making this day possible, but also for supporting this important research into the investigation into the unknown for the betterment of the world. I like that phrase. I would also like to conclude by personally thanking Göran Sandberg, the Royal Academy of Science, and Göran Hansson, so both these organizations, for trusting in me and giving me this opportunity to learn not only from this day today, but from this excellent pleasure and rewarding experience of working with this excellent group of organizers that we have. You have seen them perform today in the 4 panels. So thanks so much, and I hope for the future for this research. At least that is the bright future, that we have not seen very many dark sides of the research on democratization. So thank you all.